So, as promised, a nightmare in the real world, that being Texas. Not the worst nightmare. It plays mostly second fiddle to another one that I will be talking about later, but it's pretty bad. Here we have an article from Mediaite, which I believe I actually read an article from last stream. They've I guess they're a pretty good news outlet that just doesn't get that much play. Texas Republicans introduce a bill allowing the Secretary of State to overturn election results. So, if you're not entirely familiar with that procedural part of U.S. politics, there is an office in the executive branch of government that is in charge of running elections, and it's called the Department of State. And the head of that department is the Secretary of State. And each state, there's a federal version of this, and there's also one in every state in the United States. And in Texas, sometimes these people are appointed, sometimes they are elected. There are some states where the Secretary of State is elected by popular vote, which means that if one of them is running for re-election, then their job is to run the election where they themselves are a candidate. And this has been the source of a couple conflicts of interest in the past, but this time Republicans are sort of accelerating the issue, as they do with almost everything that they touch. Republican lawmakers in Texas proposed a bill that would enable the Secretary of State to overturn election results in counties that have 1 million residents or more. Senate Bill 1993, by the way, 1 million is an arbitrary number, was introduced on Thursday by state senators. It would allow the Secretary of State, currently a Republican, to order a new election and gain district court level authority. Basically, not only would they have the authority to overturn that election, it would be as if a state court had issued the order. So you can't challenge it. You have to appeal it federally. And only a extremely small minority of cases ever reach the federal level. And furthermore, with the right-wing majority on the Supreme Court, it's entirely possible that they would simply uphold the potential overturn of the election. The text of the bill states that the Secretary of State shall order a new election if the Secretary has good cause to believe that at least 2% of the total number of polling places in the county did not receive supplemental ballots under Section 51008 for 1 or more hours after making a request for supplemental ballots to the authority responsible for distributing election supplies. The legislation further says that the Secretary of State shall have the same authority granted to a district court. Let's see. Passage of the bill would affect 6 counties in Texas: Harris, Dallas, Tarrant, Bexar, Travis, and Collin. Presumably those are the counties with larger than 1 million population. Harris County experienced an onslaught of conspiracy theory attacks during the 2020 and 2022 elections due to having technical difficulties ranging from the polling sites opening late to having a shortage of paper ballots. So the devil's in the details here. The Republican Party's party line is that they want as few people to vote as possible. I remember in the 2020 election and the lead up to it, the Republican Party line was that mail-in voting was fraudulent, and to prevent the distribution of ballots, be they virtual or by letter or absentee, whatever. So effectively, the Republican Party strategy here, at least if I'm guessing correctly, is to first inhibit the distribution of these ballots and then challenge the election on the grounds that not enough ballots were distributed. And this would probably only be invoked if the candidate they did not like won. Given that, obviously prosecutorial discretion and legal discretion is a thing, people can decide to uphold or not uphold certain laws. I have no doubt that if a Republican candidate wins an election in Texas under suspicious circumstances, legitimately suspicious circumstances, the Secretary of State will simply elect to not take any action on the issue. Or, better yet, or worse yet, to simply, to more actively rule that the election was fair and nothing wrong happened. GOP officials, going back to the article here, conducted audits and Republican candidates challenged their losses. Current Governor Greg Abbott even conducted an investigation over allegations of improprieties. All of these efforts resulted with the conclusion that the county did not suffer from widespread voter fraud. This might not be well known to everybody, but despite the United States elections being sorely underparticipated in, they are also some of the most secure elections on the planet. You know, think about it. We're the people that do election interference to other people. It very rarely ever happens to us. And additionally, laws around voting are strict enough in the United States that it is extremely difficult to commit voter fraud and get away with it. In fact, the more likely outcome is that all of the votes are cast appropriately, but there is some systemic factor that gives people cause for concern that, you know, maybe the participation in this election was skewed, but every vote that is cast in an American election, you can say with functionally 100% certainty, is genuine. Discounting the obvious, quite literally 1 in a million exceptions of right-wingers who are casting votes on behalf of their dead family members. The expenses that would result in calling a new election by the Secretary of State would be paid for by the same authorities that funded the original election. Okay. The bill was introduced without a 48-hour notice in the State Affairs Committee. If passed, it would take effect starting September 1st, 2023. The general elections in the United States happen in November, so this would be a couple months before elections that happened during the off year, and it would be well within time for the election in 2024. And that's the whole article, it seems. So I think there's not much left to say on the matter that I haven't already said. This is one of the more legalistic and institutional ways that Republicans will attempt to cheat. Instead of doing so illegally, instead of, you know, challenging elections in such a way that they get their asses laughed out of court, as they have dozens upon dozens upon dozens of times, they will simply alter the law to give themselves unilateral authority to overturn election results that they deem inadequate. You will notice when the article said that the Secretary of State shall order a new election if the Secretary has good cause to believe, they don't specify what is good cause, and that's on purpose. By simply making something up and saying that's good cause, now you're within the bounds of the law, assuming this passes. So, to give an example of how this could play out, let's say that there's a Democratic candidate running for a state house seat, right? And it is an election that is pretty contested. And let's say that, like, it's kind of close, but ultimately the Democrat wins and the Republican loses. This bill would give the Secretary of State unilateral authority to basically say, I have cause to believe that ballots were inadequately distributed. I'm overturning the results of the election and doing it again. And basically doing that without legal repercussion as many times as they want to until the Republican wins the election. Or indeed, to do that, make it harder for Democrats to vote, in particular, with some sort of targeted measure with sly language, and then redo the process until the Republican wins. The one way that this could potentially go wrong for Republicans is if there is a legal verdict delivered before they have the opportunity to run a new election, which is extremely unlikely given how long lawsuits take in this country. Or in any country, really, but this is the framework of a liberal state being used to destroy the democracy that it presides over. And Republicans will do this in every state where they can. They are a anti-democracy party. Imagine, so to make some parallels to European parties, imagine if you took the LaREM party, Macron's party, and Les Républicains, and le Rassemblement National, the national, what's the term? I don't know. I don't remember what Rassemblement means precisely, but it used to be the National Front. If you could roll those into one party, you'd have sort of a gathering. There you go, national gathering. If you rolled those three parties into a single political unit, you'd have sort of a mishmash of populistic fascism, sort of procedural anti-democracy like you see with Macron's party, the sort of monarchism, but without the label of monarchist. That'd be a key difference. And the sort of neoconservative and neoliberal politics exhibited by all three parties of privatizing services until they are no longer viable. That is the Republican Party in the United States. And to top it all off, they do not even put up the veneer of caring about voting participation. The only capacity insofar as they're concerned with it is to reduce it. They want fewer people to vote. And you don't even need to take that information from me. There is footage of what's his name? Goldwater, I think it was, Barry Goldwater.
Have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
In the 1970s or 80s, saying, when more people vote, we lose, being Republicans, because he was a Republican. So, it is in our interest to ensure that as few people vote as possible. Sounds like a lovely bunch of well-meaning people. Oh yes, simply the best. Only the best people in charge of our right-wing party, or, you know, our other party in the United States. Definitely not psychos wearing human flesh. The easiest parallel that people draw is that the Republicans are the leopards eating people's faces party. Not the politicians, but the people that vote for them. In socialistic terms, they're purely motivated by the interests of the bourgeois and reactionary politics. But that's the state of affairs in Texas. For the sake of the very thin margin of a lifeline that democracy is holding onto it in Texas, I hope this bill does not pass. But if the Republican Party has a majority in Texas, which I'll look right now, Texas legislature. Yeah, okay. Both chambers of the legislature in Texas have a Republican majority, a very firm Republican majority. So unfortunately, this bill will likely pass. They have 19 out of the 31 seats in the Senate, and they have 86 out of the 150 seats in the lower House. And the next election is in 2024. So if this bill passes, the Republican Party will get to dictate the terms of its own defeat. Which is to say, they will simply decide not to lose. And there's not a thing that the electorate can do about it, really. This is the shape that we will see fascism take in the United States. It's going to be much more state-centric, as opposed to federal. Think of it like in France, if instead of the central government being the sort of institution that fascists or socialists or activists would target, it would be the municipal governments. You know, say L'Île-de-France or Bretagne or Gascogne in particular, that political movements would target on their own, and then together they would have to sort of coordinate across boundaries. It's a much slower approach, but there's less that the government can do about it. But anyways, cut the segment.